to White Box for the closing of the cloth, an exhibition curated by Karen Cordero Ryman and Johanna Roa. Karen is going to join us in a minute from Mexico City, and Johanna Roa is here, right there. Okay. I think it's right there. Okay. You can go back there. Behind them. Take a chair. Take a chair with you. Yep. Okay. I'll get everybody. Here. How's it working? Yep.
Hello everybody. I'm really happy in a certain way sad because it is the last day of our great exhibition. We have had a wonderful time. This exhibition allows us a great reflection about the textile, and the artists included in this show, they have different ways to think and to express their ideas using the textile. That's great. It seems that Karen. Oh, Karen
Back with her cup
Karen
of
is
coffee.
here. That's fantastic. Karen currently is in Mexico City, but she's coming to New York this week, so we will be more than happy having you here next week. They will be great if you can introduce yourself. She's a relevant feminist art historian, art creator, art critic. She has supported artists and exhibitions that put in context the women work in Mexico and here. Hello, Karen. Good to see you today.
Hi, well, it's wonderful to see everybody. I wish I were there with you. But as in the case of the first Off the Cloth, it's been an interesting experience doing a co-curation from afar. But I have been in contact with it since the conception of the first version and now the second version of Off the Cloth. And it's been really amazing to see how many different proposals from artists which combine both their vision as women, their transcultural heritage, and their different views and ways of relating cloth to personal issues as well as to community issues. So it's really been an extraordinary experience, and really I think has shown how rich and constantly expanding is this involvement with the many different aspects that textiles open up and suggest in terms of artistic creation and different possibilities of signification. So thank you so much, Johanna, for being on site and organizing this round table. And I think, do you want to introduce the topics, or should I talk about that? How do you want to work?
Whether you want, we have 3 topics. If you want to introduce them, it's okay for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're really delighted to have some of the artists in the exhibition here today to talk about their work in relation to some more general topics related to textile art and art in general. And I guess Johanna can present each one of you. And really it's been amazing also. I think I've seen online the kind of community that's been created of dialogue between the artists in the exhibit and also with the artists in the previous version in last March of Off the Cloth. And I find it really inspiring in terms of thinking about what can be generated through the work on these topics and the kind of interchange and the really extraordinary visual variety and richness that's present in this show. So thank you so much for both those of you who are there and the artists who are not able to be there today, and of course all the public, and of course Juan Puntes for being making this exhibit and this event possible. So there are three aspects that we think are important about the exhibit, which kind of tie it together and tie this project, this broader project off the cloth together. And these are the materiality of textiles and body as a possibility of producing knowledge and identifying or expressing our ways of experiencing the world. And then the life in community and the ways that textiles are related to our need to take care of each other and care for each other and express issues of caring in different ways, as well as to express self-care. So those are just some general topics that we thought might be addressed by the artists as they talk about their own work in the context of this exhibition, and perhaps some of the things that they've discovered through seeing the work of other artists. So I think it would be great if Johanna introduced the artists who will be participating and open up to whatever they would like to share with us about their experiences in this sense.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Juan is going to comment something
Yes,
about.
just going to say that we have to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for funding partially this project, as well as Materials for the Arts. Have been very generous to letting us pick up a lot of materials and other additional things, and our collaborators to be and to see here. Yeah, they make it possible for us to present these exhibitions. Besides all you wonderful curators and artists, I thank you all very much on behalf of our 24 years of history. And now moving into a series of Exodus series, which this is the 11th chapter, I believe, or the 10th of Exodus series, where we celebrate also immigration and how it applies to the well-being of New York City, terrific art scene, terrific and difficult art scene. Yeah. So I'll pass the mic to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I believe that we have a quite interesting intergenerational dialogue, intercultural dialogue, and even I believe that, you know, your ideas about the textile are quite different, but in a certain way they are a great dialogue. And I would like to, that if you can go deep in the ideas that Karen exposed a minute ago, then I would like to give the word to Margaret Lancetta. Margaret Lancetta is an American artist who used abstract, culturally significant patterns to explore postmodern conditions of fragmentation, migration, and cultural hybridity. Lancetta engaged with a variety of mediums, including painting, silk screen, digital photography, and ceramics. Then, thank you.
Well, thank you, Johanna, and thank you, Karen, and Juan. It's been wonderful. So very appreciative of being in the show and meeting the new artists and being in this great context. My work, I've been interested in textiles, you know, probably half of my life, and I have always collected them, so I have hundreds of pieces from all over the world. And I think one of my earliest kind of working with fabric was, my grandmother was a seamstress, so we always, she actually taught me how to sew and actually taught me how to cut patterns. Like, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, so my mother would buy something and my grandmother would say, well, we'll just make a pattern from it, and she would just lay it on the table and cut out the shapes for this piece in newspaper, and then we would make up the blouse or the jacket or whatever. And but for me, textiles are they're just so significant of their the protection, there's a universality to them in terms of the weaving, and it is kind of, it is a thread that connects everyone around the world. And it's interesting because in some cultures it's very much a female arena of working in the textiles, but in other cultures, say like for example in Indonesia, it's the men that do the dyeing. So and there's all kinds of religious and symbolic significance to the weaving, to the dyeing, and you find that in a lot of places. So I think that the whole concept, the whole thing of a textile in so many cultures has become, it's so important that it becomes imbued with religious or cultural importance. In fact, like in Indonesia, they won't dye on if it's, a certain phase of the moon. It's considered that would ruin the dye bath and things like that. So I find that really fascinating, the relationships people form with textiles and within their own culture. And then in terms of things, like when we think about like migration or refugees, textiles is the one thing they can carry with them. And that women that can weave, or we see that a lot, like in Afghanistan, the very famous rug weavings. So it's the one thing that people can carry that has significance and meaning, and it's also a craft that allows many women to have a form of income. So, and it's a portable craft, so that it's just really it's a very powerful subject, and it's something that we don't even think about because every day we get up and we put our clothes on, and then the patterning, how textiles travel, they were really a thing that was very much carried not only over the overland in the Silk Route, but also by ship, with waterways, and it's still going on because a lot of the patterns that a lot of work with a lot of Indian saris, but they're all contemporary patterns on the saris. So they're patterns that have come from the internet or from a global arena of design. And to me, that's really interesting because, with the internet and things like that, it allows the world to access cultural symbols and reappropriate them in their own way. And so my pieces are a hybrid of textiles from different countries and different cultures. Then I also silk screen on top of them to impose my own pattern, to create a dialogue with the existing pattern. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. Since I don't weave, I'm interested in taking textiles and putting my imprint on them in relationship to what I find and what I'm working, what's my canvas.
Well, we paint on canvas.
Yeah, well, canvas is a textile too.
Actually, canvas is a textile.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, the optic fiber is a textile too.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that maybe to the history, something that was overlooked was the relevance of the textile in the human civilization. Not only the fibers, but as a technology that changed the people's life, like the agriculture, the relevance point.
I mean, they were very valuable. They were very valuable. And when you think about a textile, if you're going to have a trade item, it's not breakable. They're generally not heavy compared to like ceramics or stone carvings. They fold up. You can take a giant, big rug, and it can package up in a size that you can fit in a backpack. So they're just imminently made for trade. And I mean, textile. They say that the general accepted wisdom is that the textiles of India, funded the Industrial Revolution in England, because they were so valuable, these textiles that came back to England, and they started producing them. And so they also have a lot of political, in a subtle, hidden way, there's a lot of political implications behind textiles. And then then they put an embargo on Indian textiles because they wanted to develop their own industry, you know. But England wasn't the only country that did that. You know, this is, you know, I'm not as familiar with Latin America, but I'm sure that there's a really similar trajectory when there is a colonial power involved with.
Yeah, probably. But
Yeah.
I believe that we could, you know, keep in mind that at the same time that, you know, one person decides to use a textile to create a robe, you know, and change things with that, other person, you know, could fold something, cut it to create a simple design, you know, with a hole for your head and for your
like your
arms.
wheat peel.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
my wheat peel.
Yeah.
Then, but that changed everything since that moment. Then we have now design, another crazy thing, you know, like a trust fashion. But anyway, thank you, Margaret. I would like to introduce Eleni Milonas. And okay, I'm gonna read part of your bio, but I'm curious about your background too, and I believe that today is a good day to ask you about that. Eleni Milonas is a multidisciplinary artist. Her work moves across media and forms. She had solo exhibition at the MoMA PS1, Benaki Museum in Athens. She has a large number of solo exhibition and a group exhibition. Part of her photography work is embedded at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. I was curious because you have a background as a journalist, and I would like to know how that background is linked with your artistic practice, and especially with your piece here in the exhibition.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this show. It was an opportunity to show this work in New York, and thank you to Juan and to the gallery. Yes, I have a journalism background. I went to Columbia Journalism in the 60s, and it was a completely different world then, but it really changed my life. I was very fortunate. I had very, very important teachers. Broadcast journalism was what I was interested in. It was just starting then. And my teacher in broadcast journalism was Fred Friendly, who is the father of documentary films and also the father of WNET. He created it that year. So, and also in photography, I had Arthur Rothstein, who was a farm security administrative photographer. Look magazine had just reopened for a while, and he took me into Look, and I did like a week's residency there. So I was extremely fortunate in those ways. But I didn't really work as a journalist, except later as a photographer, of editorial photographer. I never did advertising or anything like that. But I went to school in England at the London University, and I studied photography. I traveled a lot, and the textile aspect of this exhibition is purely coincidental, because it looks like I'm working with textiles, but I'm not. What I am doing is I'm collecting garbage from the sea. And what I chose to do is to wear them. But in terms of what Johanna asked, this it's a journalistic gesture, because I am recording something that is happening that touches me very personally. It's part of my life, because I walk on garbage on the beach, because I collect it when I swim, and so forth. And acting as a reporter of a different kind, I report my experience to the rest of the world. So that's journalism. This is the duty I have to report my experience. And I choose to report my experience in a multimedia way, let's say. When I travel, I do a lot of pictures, a lot of videos, I talk to people. So anyway, and I do a lot of performative work now, video and performance. That's the way it happened, you know.
Yeah, but there is something that I would like to go deep, because when Karen and I talk about the exhibition and we decided to invite you to participate in this exhibition, we were thinking about an idea that I believe that is related with the Sonja work in this exhibition. It is about the life in community.
The what?
The life in a community.
Uh-huh.
You know, they needed to take care of each other. That you can think that to be alive is to be alone, you know, and cover your own needs. And in your video, you are singing and you are crying. It's a play, you know. And this is about an idea of society and the community, the need of each other. And textile has the same issue. Textile is not only about a technique or a material. Maybe it's a political position to face the world too, and has a long trajectory through the civilization to engage the community. For the reason, it seems that you are not using, you know, embroidery or fabrics, but in a certain way you are creating a fabric. You are thinking about that when you are praying, when you are spinning. You know, it's the same. It's a similar idea. May I?
Yes, it is. But I had not made the connection directly, you know,
It's a very important
before,
connection.
but it is, yes.
Thanks for bringing that point up.
Oh, thank you so much. And you know,
But that community aspect that you are talking
Yeah,
about
of course.
is well-intentioned journalism.
yeah, and
I
for,
mean-
you know,
Could you tell us what you were singing in Sanskrit?
The song,
Yes.
the Greek song was also a life experience, because I was actually walking on the beach and on garbage, on, you know, shards of garbage, and in my mind came this song that everybody knows in Greece, and it is about the little crabs that are crawling on the, you know, on the shore, and their mother has gone off gallivanting with the fish, and where is she? And it's a song everybody knows. So, but it reminded me of how it was when I was growing up in the 50s, pristine beaches, and you could actually see the crabs. And it's a song about the crabs of the sea, but we're walking on garbage. And I started, tears came to my eyes, because it was a disastrous situation. The chant is a chant, you know. It's an evocation to the higher forces to please help, you know. Help us to change, help us to see, in Sanskrit.
thank you so
Thank you.
much. Let's wait for a while. I would like to go over some ideas, but I believe that this is a good point to introduce Sonja, and Sonja has to, mixed background. I believe that it's relevant. Sonja Brun is a neurologist and artist working across multiple media, including video, installation, writing, and performance. Actually, you just published a book that you brought yesterday. She explores a space between intuition, memory, and social politics to ask how collectively identity and modes of knowledge production are determined. Then it's a similar question. Tell us about, because you're talking about the body as a way to experience the world, and that's relevant. And tell us about that idea and your general background. How are you connected with it?
Which is the work.
The two panels there, yes. Well, first I wanted to start by saying, thank you, Johanna and Karen, for inviting me to participate to answer your question, and like a complete nerd, you know, with my background, I actually prepared something written, which I'm not going to read. I may look into it a little later, but you know, my background, you know, in neurology and neuroscience, I did for many years. I mean, I trained to be a scientist and a physician, and I spent many years in the lab. I worked with, you know, really the most micro kind of reductionist method, you know, with all this, you know, mRNA technology, protein blots, animal research, you know, just very, very to the most micro reduction of the knowledge kind of production system, like the scientific method to its core, you know. And I spent years in that, and the questions that you know, the core question for me was memory, but the methods, I got to know these reductionist scientific methods very well, and more over years, it sort of started to become sort of like this, first like an intuition, but then it just really became clear to me that maybe it is sadly true that by just blindly pursuing the scientific method, even though it has brought a lot of innovation in understanding things on a genetic and molecular level, that it's just digging and digging and digging, and over many years I actually just really started to see it as extraction, the kind of extraction that happens in exploitation of the earth, the you know, colonialism, the tearing apart of earth and communities, like kind of just as a modality of living and knowing the world by reducing everything and digging up everything. And I just really started to question also the throwing away of the body. So this Cartesian idea that the mind and the logic and, you know, the entire heritage of the Enlightenment of just like this focus on the steps of the logical mind, but really expanding of the body is really, you know, became something that I started to explore in my artwork, and started to really let my body first intuitively really insert itself into this mechanized kind of breaking apart kind of extractionary model. And so this piece here that you chose for the show, I think, is really at that threshold between like my own body finding itself with questions in relation to this, to the reductionist model, and trying to find my own way to insert my own body to ask questions about, you know, what is bothering me here. And I found some answers which have sort of continued, you know. So what happened, that the story of this piece is actually, it was made shortly after I was a professor of neurology at NYU, and I left to really explore these questions about body and art, and just leaving that behind me. So this piece emerged as a very impulsive gesture where I just printed out literally just like 2 months worth of bibliographies, neuroscience bibliographies on memory, which is my field. But it was so much. It was thousands of papers. It was like trash, you know, like garbage. It's like actually not containing much information at all. It's basically just these production, extraction, and like literally nobody could even read this. So I printed these bibliographies, and I just started to not read them because they're not even readable and mostly not even real information. And I was just like, okay, let me weigh them. Let me do other things with them. And then I plastered them all over this wall, and I just had this impulsive gesture of literally creating graffiti over it and spray painting it. So I just took some cans of spray paint, and I started to just spray paint over it. And it's just what my body wanted to do. And then that's how the process sort of unfolded, that then step by step I found answers. So then I tore apart these bibliographies and was left with a grid-like, kind of a ghost of these lines that are, to me, kind of like this haunting ghost of this kind of extraction aerial reproduction. And so, I know it's a very lengthy answer, but these pieces, you know, really then sort of exemplify that, or really show that tension between sort of the body trying to insert itself. And I think that I feel like I'm taking a long time, so I could maybe just shorten it by reading some of the notes that I made, or coming back to it in a bit.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much. Well, maybe it's the time to introduce the youngest artist in the exhibition. Sorry, but Ofelia Arc. And it's great having you here and to have this dialogue, you know, because this different perspective and generation expressing ideas, you know. Then Ofelia is a multidisciplinary artist based in New York City. Is in sculpture, video, and installation. Art investigates psychoanalytic themes, and they are related to her personal experience and memories. Thank you to be here today with us. And I have many, you know, people is always curious about this piece. For some people, look like you know, flesh hanging, you know, from the ceiling. But you say that maybe you never thought about that. But let us know about these, you know, moving sculptures.
Yeah. So thank you for having me in the show. Just to be with all these amazing artists is really like inspiring. It makes me really happy to have like my work amongst so many amazing pieces. These sculptures in particular, I was thinking of maybe in parallel to my primary theme, which is like the body, and specifically the body decaying, but in a less grotesque way. I'm getting into the more abject of it all, but when I made that piece, I was thinking of this, the tactility of making this form that kind of degrades as it becomes more complex. So as the pieces ascend, it is made through a skin, like a skin of crochet that is comprised of the digits of pi. So the first skin is made of 300 of the digits of pi to make the skin, and then I stretched out and built from there, so it is the least amount of numbers, with the middle one having 600 and the last one having 1,000. And so as the crochet pattern becomes more complex, it becomes less there, and it becomes lighter, and kind of like this deterioration of sorts. And the first iteration of batteries was to have that one die first, and then them subsequently die after. I've replaced them since, just to keep the momentum going on the pieces, but yeah, it was kind of about flesh, but only tangentially. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Damn bright.
Thank you.
Okay, we have many ideas on the table, but maybe Karen has, you know, questions or comments.
Oh, that's Karen.
Hi. Yes, it's fascinating listening to all of you and showing and seeing how somehow the things you're talking about are also kind of interweaving in their relations. One thing that I think is important in listening to you is really the prevalence of the body in all your work in different ways. I mean, in the performance, in the performative aspect of the work of many of you, but also the ways in which the intuition and the kind of and even chance and the things that happen when your body moves through space or works with particular objects, the kind of tactile aspect. Of course, the body is central to all art, but in this particular case, I think the particular qualities of textile, which some of you have mentioned, and sometimes as a real thing, and as Elena mentioned, sometimes as a kind of almost accidental metaphor in relation to things which are not actually textile but kind of look like textile or become involved in it, and how they become involved with the body, I think is really amazing. You know, I think there's a very interesting dialogue, for instance, between Elena's work, Elena's video, and Ophelia's video, where she's unraveling the textile. I think it's really interesting how the works speak to each other, even though their focus is very different, and the ways in which Margaret talked about the specific qualities of textile which make it a vehicle of dialogue between cultures, both in an economic sense and in a visual sense, and the kind of ways in which textiles from different cultures enrich other cultures, both literally in an economic sense, but also in this visual sense, the sense of this visual variety of the ways in which they transform one experience into another. And I also think it's interesting how Sonia emphasized the role of intuition, and how her movement from a concern with memory led her to abandon kind of a scientific methodology towards a much more intuitive or process that led to the specific qualities of her work. I think that the role of intuition and how that's related both to the body and somehow the suggestive qualities of textile, I think is really, really important. How the forms and textures and ways in which textile can relate to the body become a vehicle for expressing both things that we're conscious of and not conscious of. So these are some of the things that came to mind as I listened to you, and I think there are certainly many more that we could talk about, the kind of bridges that are created between the work and the ways in which consolidate the ways in which textile and as a kind of material and metaphor is present in different ways in our lives, and the ways in which that can be activated and is activated by each one of your works in different ways. I've also been thinking, you know, somehow there's been this kind of boom, one might say, in the visibility or attention or recognition, really, maybe also of how these different kind of aspects or tentacles of a kind of constellation around the idea of textile art has been something that's been kind of ever more visible and kind of present in the contemporary art world, through these two exhibitions, and through what they've provoked in their audience. Different artists have contacted both Johanna and myself, saying that they're seeing the affinities, identifying or expressing the affinities of their work with the works in the exhibition. So I think these works also create a focus on, or a possibility of identification, which is very interesting, and of the different ways in which they reach out to us and reach out to different people and touch their own processes. And it seems like almost it could be an expanding exhibition. Hopefully we'll be able to have a third edition next year. But it also seems to be an exhibition which creates community in that sense, kind of create by articulating things which are the differences between the works are articulated in relation to certain common which, as Elena said, maybe even the artists themselves weren't necessarily aware of. And I think that creates a really, literally, a kind of interwoven textile, one might say, which is a kind of text as well, which can be drawn out from the relation between these different works in the gallery and in relation to their public. So I can't really see how many people are there in Whitebacks today, but I don't know whether there are people in the audience that would like to ask questions or make additional comments, or whether the artists on the panel would also like to make some comments about what the other artists have said. So
thank you.
And if you can
Maybe
see if there are people to say things.
do you have a question or a comment? Because there is an idea that that for me at least is relevant about what is political, in this exhibition. What is political? Because I believe we have a different point of view about what is the theme. In the traditional and patriarchal way, political issue is talk about the war, and that's relevant. But in the daily life, what is political? When you, for example, Sonja is saying that for me to express myself, to go through the war, trying to be more conscientious and aware about my body, probably is an idea to be political. To recover the memory of the patterns, to understand the body. What is political in this exhibition? I believe that that's relevant because this instance is trying to move something in a different way, to open a door, to open the ideas about what the women and the subculturals, place in the world has produced in knowledge. That's political too, and it's a powerful place. That's different in the traditional idea that the main issues are political, is relevant in this exhibition. And then maybe, I believe that it's clear when you're talking about your pieces. I just wanted to point out that, that's relevant in this exhibition, and I believe in the previous one. And I would like to dig more in, maybe in the third part of the cloth.
Maybe it's not incidental that fabrics are always sort of a reference to things that happen in families, things that are historic, that is all the linguistic references inherent in stitching, knitting, weaving, whatever is part of the fabric of our language. And we are making use of it just incidentally, because we have been trained, we have observed family members stitching things together. It's part of our fabric. And it's a recording device. It's a language in itself, but also a very broad language.
It just occurred to me, every country in the world is represented by a textile flag. It's not, that's because it's like universal. It's not like countries decided to make some kind of a sculpture that would represent the country. Like some kind of symbolic sculpture or a sculpture of, the founder of the country or something, and that every country started doing that. And every country has a fabric flag. I think that, it's really crazy when you think about that. How did this start? Who came up with it? And you know, and the color, you know, it's all symbolic and,
Yeah.
you know.
But it also goes into detail. I remember conversations with my grandmother based on the patterns she stitched.
Mm.
So it's really tied very, very closely to our culture.
Yeah.
Well, the traditional clothes, you
Mhm.
know, the women showed all their talent and everything, and there was a specific way, thing you had to do, like let's say
Mhm.
this, but everyone was different. And the creativity went from early on into the cover for the wedding. But it
Yeah.
was the richness and the art of the community, this very close community. The next village did it slightly different. So it was an identification of belonging to the same group.
Belongs in your department.
That's true, and at the same time, for example, if you see this image, that is a photo of Eleni, you know, at the same time, this is, you know, the other side of the thing. What are we doing, you know, as a community? We are producing that faster fashion that you can wear
there
for
was.
one day and throw it away. That's what I'm thinking at the same time, you know. Yes, it's beautiful. Today I'm wearing this wonderful. This is one of my favorites, huipiles, you know, made by hand. But at this, it's a thing that I'm not gonna throw away.
Mhm.
You know, I love it, and one person or two, I don't know, two people spend time doing this dedicated, you know, embroidering this dedicated fabric. But at the same time, we have that. You know, you are picking up garbage, you know, from the
Yes,
region,
but
from the ocean. We have both things at the same time, beauty and, you know, destroying the world in the same hand. Textile is a complicated and a complicated, you know, concept and thing in the world.
We preserve rags, but you know, by all industrial standards would be rags. We wear these sweaters that are falling of our bodies because we are so emotionally attached to them. You know, it's,
Look, you know, this is similar of the
This
Eleni
is
dress.
Chloe imitating me. Look at that.
You can show to the camera.
yeah.
Can I see that?
Both
Can you see
women.
that?
And maybe Karen.
Yeah, hang on.
Hang it on.
This is okay, Eleni.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think fabric just has this way of tying.
Uh-huh.
Everyone can kind of relate to fabric as it stands because everybody has some sort of connection with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's this idea. This one philosopher Winnicott talks about this about the transitional object and how we all have these transitional objects that help us kind of move through life. And a lot of times those are fabrics, whether that be like a child's favorite teddy bear, that's a fabric, or your like lucky t-shirt or whatever it might be. And so these things kind of transverse any sort of differences, right? And are something you can always kind of tie back to. It can be cultural, like I know, for example, crochet, there's a rich history behind it, but for me, no one taught me how to, I just picked it up, I made this fabric of my own, I made this own like culture of my own for this thing, and there's a long history behind it, even with my family, that I don't know about because no one talked about it, so it might be there, and that's something to further investigate, sure, but it's this, fabric has, and textiles have this ability of tying people together, and a lot of times because it is seen as women's work, it is often diminished from it's just seen as like, oh, there will be clothes, there will be something to wear, as opposed to a work of labor like your garment, right? Or any of the pieces in this show.
I must say I'm privileged to have grown up, or was born in the Caribbean, and to have this coming out of this interwoven society of many different origins, and politically maybe not the most ideal environment, but it is a fabulous preserver of the conversations that come out of fabric, out of the culture of having, fabricating, sitting in a meeting and producing a piece. That's wonderful. And the family interaction in the Caribbean, I don't know if any of you grew up in the Caribbean? No.
I grew up in Colombia.
Yeah, but similar culture. Maybe not quite as diverse, but the family interaction was always accompanied by some handiwork. And that handiwork, most of the time, was fabric. And that fabric was the sort of anecdotal aspect of women communicating. This is how I learned how my mother, my grandmother, my sister communicated differently than my brother or my father. So there was also the gender aspect of it that plays into it. I don't know, she didn't want to go into that aspect of it.
Can you hear that, Karen? Because he's saying that he want to go deep in that aspect.
No, I didn't say that. She wanted to stay away from it, I think, by her facial expression.
Well, I think it is interesting. I think it is interesting that the gendered aspect of textiles certainly, and this one, as Margaret also mentioned, the kind of general idea that textile is associated with females, and I think there is a strong association in many cases with of textiles with a female sphere of activities in this broader sense of weaving, crocheting, but also as Margaret mentioned, I think these generalizations are always vulnerable to specification, and I think there are also cultures in which there are specific aspects of textile production which are taken up by men, and more I think when one begins to observe these generalizations, they begin to break down, and as almost all generalizations about gender do, I think often our ideas about gender are so much fixed on this kind of binary, or built on this binary, which, when we look at it closely, begins to fortunately dissolve. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects. But I think in this case, it dissolves in a positive sense, in which we can see more clearly kind of some of the general uses and ways in which textiles are interrelated to so many different aspects of our lives, and take on roles which go beyond, and take on an importance which goes beyond the idea that they and recognizes their importance, as opposed to the idea that they're part of a kind of feminine sphere, and therefore they're invisibilized, and therefore don't receive the attention that both as objects and as part of and in terms of their use, because textiles also have this relationship, as we've talked about, to the body, the relationship to use. They're objects which are kind of essentially in movement, and I think that fact that they're essentially in movement is something which is taken up in many different ways, precisely by the works of this exhibition. I'm seeing, Ophelia's sculpture there, turning around on the screen as I look. So I think that kind of aspect of the works being essentially in movement also applies to the ways that they're in movement in relation to a lot of the stereotypes or conventions that are often associated, perhaps the textiles, I don't know if I'm thinking about Ophelia's film, perhaps the textiles can be a way of unraveling some of these fixed ideas and allowing them to interrelate into our ideas to interrelate to each other in different ways, more intuitive, more interactive, more based on a kind of network of relations. And I think in that sense, going back to what you said, Johanna, about how textiles are political, I think that possibility for moving into spaces which are often not occupied or by the hegemonic viewpoint, and then to emerge and sometimes in very subversive ways, which I think is what's happening a lot with the use of textiles in art these days. I think this is one of the strengths of the medium, or the various mediums really, which are alluded to with or related to textiles in art. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, and thank you so much. Thanks the artist. Thank you for coming today. Sadly, it's time to finish it. To close the show, to thank you, Karen, and it was wonderful to work again with you in this project. I hope that we can have more projects in the future. And thanks the artists, I hope the same thing, to see you again and to work again. Thanks for, the people that is here with us today. Thanks to White Box, and to Juan Puntes is today behind the camera. If, anyone has a comment more, or it's time to say thank you and goodbye, and we will have a third part, like a, good movie.
Okay.
Then thanks. Bye, Karen, and
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
I have to see you soon, some of you soon in person in New York next week.
Yes. Karen will be here next week, but we can talk.
I'm arriving on Tuesday. Unfortunately, I'm so sad that we weren't able to move the dates of the exhibit so that I would actually be able to see it in person. It seems so tragic to be so close and so far, but because of other commitments of White Box, unfortunately, it wasn't possible. But I actually will be at the opening next week on Thursday of the new exhibition at White Box. So if anybody else will be there, it'll be wonderful to see you.
Okay, thank you. Hi.
And thank you all very much. This ends the transmission via Facebook. Whitebox NY Facebook will have this footage for everybody to look into. And I like that sentiment of tragic and the emotional part of fabric. Because when I wake up, I look at these stripes and I test myself whether my emotion is ready for these stripes or for a blue color, dressing black, etc., right?
It's part of your fabric.
That's correct. And so we don't have time today to expand, because my question was going to be for the artist to talk about the emotional part of that thread that then gets dyed into color, then gets destroyed, runs into the beaches, $1 a pound, into what used to be called the third world, the less privileged countries, getting our threads. So yes, Karen, we should do part 3, and maybe the 3 of us can curate and bring electronic, digital, those new fabrics.
But
all right?
Also, the statistics say that one big problem with garbage is clothing.
Yes.
And a lot of the clothing we wear is plastic, and plastic is dead matter. It's not cotton. Cotton is fine, silk is fine, but it's dead matter. It's all over. And apparently it's a big issue with a big proportion, let's say, of the garbage we leave behind, because it's, you know, it's ephemeral. We buy it today, we throw it away tomorrow. It's the same culture, the throwaway society, and we have to stop that, because
Except the material aspect of it is not that ephemeral. It is not
the real material.
Exactly. That's the,
Because that's a lie.
that's a really a tragic consequence between the topic of the exhibition and a permanent residue. It's
All right, that's the title for the next one, Permanent Residue of the Cloth, number 3.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.